All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is 6:45. We started 15 minutes late to have a break. And we are going to go ahead and start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I asked Pam to lead us in the pledge. So go ahead and come on up.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I turned my mic off. Sorry about that. All right, thank you so much. We have no minutes to approve today, and we'll go ahead and move on with our next agenda item, and that's recognizing the Murray City Council Employee of the Month. And I'll turn it over to Brett. Go ahead, Brett.
Travis and John, will you come up, please? Thank you. It's the first order I've ever given John in my life. I said it nice. You did. Snap fusses. I do. Travis, come on up. Oh, Travis loves this. He's so excited for this.
I really am.
I know. Hi, buddy. I've known Travis almost your whole life, Travis.
Yeah.
He's just a neighbor kid that lives around the corner. And I've told this story probably 10 years ago, but our son, Nate, who you're about a year apart?
Yeah,
and was having a hard time hitting the baseball, and he just couldn't hit it. And Cindy couldn't teach him. I don't know why Cindy couldn't teach him to hit that ball over the fence, but Travis's mom, Julie, said to me, "Can I take Nate over to a field and have him practice a little bit?" And I said, "Absolutely." He hit a home run that night, and I give Julie all the credit for Nate's ability to baseball. But anyway, Travis has been with us. Have you been over 10 years?
Yeah.
11 years? 11 years. And we have been really blessed to have Travis on board. Travis is a hard worker, and I'm sure John's going to expand on that. But he's a Murray kid. All the years he spent in Murray, and a great worker. We've heard lots about Travis, and I know Travis personally, and so it's a great honor for us to be able to recognize Travis as our Employee of the Month. Now, we started this program about 8 years ago. So Travis, we'll put your name on the plaque back there, and it'll last as long as this building lasts, and we'll move it over to the new building. And but you have been awesome. You're just an awesome young man, an awesome employee. So we've got a $50 gift card for you, Travis. And then we want to give you the certificate that recognizes you. So from the City Council, and John's going to say a few things, but from the City Council, we want to tell you how much we appreciate you, and let's give him a round of applause. Thanks, Travis. Thanks.
Yeah. I always like the opportunity to embarrass one of my coworkers, so I don't want to miss this at all. Mayor's office, City Council, thanks for letting me talk tonight a little bit and to recognize Travis. So a little over 3 years ago, I got the fire chief position, and one of my initiatives was to really consolidate, refine, and improve our training program. And I made a proposal at the time to City Council, many were there, about having a designated training officer position. And this is a program that was very dear to my heart. And at the time, we had a few people who were in charge of little parts of our training. And they tried to do a good job, but we have 3 different shifts. So they weren't training all 3 shifts the same. They weren't all doing the same thing, the same goals. And I really needed someone with just a really strong, a lot of energy, a really positive attitude just to take this new position and run with it. And I got to tell you, I picked the right guy. I really did. And so I got a list of what he did. But we don't have quite enough time to go through the whole list. But I'll mention some of these things. Fire instructor class, forcible entry class, fire officer class, fire inspector, fire investigator, ADO aerial. Got either rescue training drills over at the power department. We had live fire. We had a demo house on the east side of Murray. And a big thing was, we were tearing down the old Station 81. So we coordinated drills with all the fire departments in the valley to come to Station 81 after we out of it and do rescue drills in there. Then, so this is all in the middle of COVID too. Like if we didn't make the job tough enough on them, it's all in the middle of that. And then Brooke can attest to this. So we're tearing down that old fire station. We have the ability to surplus some items from it, which is an amazing hassle of work of taking pictures of everything, descriptions, putting on the public website, and then meeting people there and selling it. And he took over that whole project. And I don't know how many thousands of dollars he brought in. Yeah, I'm telling you, it was really impressive. And, you know, this training officer position, the best way to put it is the position's a sprint, okay? And I treat it kind of like a relay race. I want someone to take this position and be sprinting the whole time. And as soon as they start slowing down, I want them to give that baton to someone else. Because I don't want anyone just to be lax about our training in it. And it's a 2-year spot. Travis gave his spot away this summer. But I tell you, he ran all the way to the end. He did a fantastic job. And I couldn't be more pleased with him. You know, Travis, I brought this for you. You know, there's a whole challenge coin. There's a whole history of it in the military about giving this to troops and individuals. This is one special from my office, and I'd like to present this to you tonight, Travis. And just, again, thank you from my heart for really making this position successful.
Travis.
For him to introduce his family.
Yeah, go ahead.
And make a speech.
I'll talk for a minute. So I have my family back here in the row. My mom with the phone. Sorry, she's holding it up there recording. I have my son, Remy, my daughter, Esme, my dad, Randy, my grandma and grandpa. My wife isn't here tonight. She had to work. So I do want to say, though, that I had an absolute blast in the training position. It was fun all the way through. I got to do a lot of amazing things. I got to burn a lot of things, burn cars for firefighters to practice. I got to cut cars up. I got to demo buildings, light buildings on fire. It was awesome. But I think that one of the best things about the position was getting to know every single firefighter, all the way from the chief, all the way down to the newest hire. And I got to build a relationship with everybody. So I think that was probably one of the coolest things about the position that I got to take away from it. But thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you. Council, would you guys like to say anything?
Congratulations and thank you so much for your service. We really do appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. And your family. I see you guys all glowing and it's wonderful. So be proud.
And they can get up and leave, can't they?
Yes, you are more than welcome to leave. Go enjoy dinner.
I have already talked instructions from your mom on that one. So.
All right. We'll go ahead and move on. Tonight we are all council members are present. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. And then we'll move on to the next portion of our agenda, and that is citizen comments. Citizen comments will be up to 3 minutes long. You can also check in with Jennifer, and if you haven't filled out a form, to make a citizen comment. Anyone ready to come up and make a comment? Okay, seeing no one, we'll go ahead and move on to consent agenda, which we do not have, and we'll open our public hearing. And the first item of our public hearing is consider an ordinance on the text amendments to the MCCD, TOD, MOU, and the new MOU zones. Melinda Greenwood and Jared Hall will be presenting.
Yeah, the TV on the other side of the room, you all can't see it, but it's not working. So I don't want my big head to be in the way of the TV on the side that is working. So we'll move this down. So thank you. We're adjusting everything. Sorry. So thanks for having us. We're excited to have an opportunity to go through some of this stuff again and present to you. To start out, this is a proposal that has some complex some complex portions, but again, it relates to our mixed-use zones. We have 3 currently: the MCCD, the Murray City Center District, the MU zone, mixed-use zone, and the transit-oriented development zone. The proposal that we're putting before you tonight is about the temporary land use restriction. In February, the council voted to institute a temporary land use restriction that was going to run for 180 days. That is set to expire soon. And the purpose of that TLUR was to allow us time to, without applications and new applications for rezonings and new applications in the existing mixed-use zones, to consider the things about the mixed-use zone and future mixed-use zones that would be appropriate. And concerns ranged from parking and density to buffering and design considerations. And we tried to look at all those things, and we'll go over some of them tonight. And again, this is a fairly in-depth presentation, but it does not cover all of the changes that are in your drafts. If you have questions as we go through, please feel free to jump in at any time. It doesn't have to go through each slide before we interrupt and take questions, so no problem there. We're going to start by talking about where we do mixed-use zoning and what mixed-use zones are about. We talked a little bit about why we wanted to do mixed-use zoning and why we support mixed-use zoning as a staff when we met with you in June. And those things are all still valid. Mixed-use zones are zones where commercial uses are mixed with residential uses, usually higher density residential uses, and there are some benefits to that. It's more sustainable development. It gets people out of their cars. It allows us to do some things that we can't do in traditional other zones. Other areas of the city will remain zoned for single-family zoning or for commercial only, but certain parts of the city we do feel like mixed-use zones are appropriate. For example, currently we have the TOD zone. That's a mixed-use zone up around the Fireclay Station in the north end of the city. The mixed-use zone, the MCCD, around the downtown to revitalize the downtown, and the MU zone, the mixed-use zone that's centered on the track station at Murray Central Station. So those areas are obviously is the wrong word, traditionally good areas for mixed use projects and developments. And mixed use is a more traditional development style where people have access to commercial facilities, to services, to job opportunities, that kind of thing, right where they live. That kind of zoning is becoming more common in other parts of cities as well, but it needs to be adjusted based on where it's going to be. So as we look at where new mixed-use zones would be appropriate, the council had considered rezone applications, or was set to consider rezone applications for mixed use from commercial zoning on the east side of the city along State Street, where we didn't currently have mixed-use zones. We wanted to address those issues as well. And so in addition to changes that we're proposing to the TOD zone, MCCD zone, and MU zone, we're proposing 2 new zones called the Center's Mixed Use Zone and the Village Mixed Use Zone. They're sort of lighter versions of mixed use zone that's around transit. So when you have transit stations, as we have in these areas where we're currently using mixed use zones, you have really good opportunities for people to get out of their cars, and that's a good place to do mixed uses at higher densities, higher residential densities. In other parts of the city, it may be appropriate. In our 2017 general plan, the consultants and staff and city recognized in that plan that there were parts of the city where mixed use, adding residential to commercial, would be appropriate and would be a growing pressure. But those zones are different. They're not, they're already commercial areas, and we want to add residential to them. So looking at those, this is a map from the general plan. It's the small area plan map. There are a couple of maps that are features of the general plan that identify these same areas. Basically, each of these kind of colors corresponds to an area of the city where the consultants showed us that we would probably want to consider changes in the future. Many of those having to do with adding the ability of projects and developments to redevelop as mixed-use sites instead of as traditional commercial sites. The reason that we're proposing 2 different zones, Village and CMU, or the Village VMU and the Center's CMU, is because these areas are distinct. This area is largely residential with a commercial node in the middle of it, for example. That would be appropriate for village mixed use, city and retail centers that were identified. Along State Street, we have a lot of commercial property, and it would be appropriate to allow that to revitalize itself, to rehabilitate itself with adding some residential to it. That brings in, as a development comes in and is allowed to do residential development, multifamily residential development, they can attract more and new tenants to their sites. But it is a more commercial area adding residential. Where this is a more residential area with a slight commercial node that we want to allow high density residential in to help rehabilitate and keep that use viable and active, and make it more accessible to the areas around it as well. So these folks in the east side areas, for example, wouldn't have to drive as far to go to their commercial uses if we're revitalizing these commercial areas with mixed use. These are just some graphics from the sprawl repair manual we wanted to put in. They kind of illustrate well what we're talking about. You have a transportation corridor that might be an appropriate area for a newly instituted mixed use zone, like the village mixed use, for example. You have gas stations and that kind of thing where they've developed with parking lots out front. If you allow them some mixed use ability to add some residential units, you can facilitate a different kind of development or redevelopment in that area than you would have otherwise, rather than letting the commercial limp along into the future. This is a commercial center that's got a lot of parking around it. As you consolidate that and they add parking decks and things with residential, when you add those kind of densities, you can get parking decks and reduce some of the use of this property that's been used as surface parking lot for buildings and more interesting infrastructure, connections of streets, for example. But this is a more commercial area that already exists that's being allowed to add some residential to it. When we consider those areas as a city, we're proposing as a staff that as you consider rezones to those areas, you look at these kinds of goals that we've identified on the side here. These are in the codes for the VMU and CMU zones. And if we're not able to say that the area that we're considering for a mixed use zone instead of CD zoning or whatever it is would result in at least 5 of these 8 goals being met, then that's not an appropriate site for mixed use. It should be able to do these things. Providing mixed use there should accomplish those goals. That's a little bit about how we would suggest you consider where to add those 2 additional zones, mixed use zones. A couple of things to understand about them. This is just a slide for the center's mixed use. Again, this is an area that's already commercial, so you can kind of see this is an area. I think that's a cheesecake factory, so it seemed appropriate since the mall is a likely area, frankly, in the next decade or half a decade to want to add residential properties to it to revitalize itself. That's the way malls are reimagining themselves all over the country, and Fashion Place is an important area. We want to be able to accommodate that. Parking for these kind of facilities should be based on bedroom counts. That's a significant change from how we have considered or how we have regulated parking in mixed use zones heretofore. As we look at just unit counts. So there's an apartment complex coming in a mixed use environment. It's got 200 units. The standard is 1.25 spaces per unit, for example, and you just count the units and add the parking. And then there's additional reductions, 10% reduction for being near a transit station, et cetera. You get done with all of that and you have a final parking count. The parking that we're suggesting, making modifications to the existing mixed-use zones and to the new zones that we're proposing, is based more on the bedroom counts. So higher counts of parking for 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms and on down to studio units as well. Base residential densities are 35 units per acre we're proposing, with possible increases to 40 and 45 tied to things that you can do to make the site more livable, more commercially viable, a better mixed-use site, for lack of a better way of saying it. For example, the residential density in the CMU zone, these are the increases that we're talking about. If you can provide open space and more open space and project amenities, again, there's open space already required for mixed-use developments, 15%, but if you can take that 15% to 25% and add 2 additional project amenities, outdoor project amenities, then we could consider allowing 40 units per acre. Or if you can do affordable housing. This is a good opportunity with mixed-use zoning to provide affordable housing. It's not the only opportunity for affordable housing, but it is a good opportunity if we can incentivize that and allow people, developers, to consider using that as a method of increasing their density, or providing additional commercial, which frankly then just intensifies the benefits that mixed use brings to whatever area that it's being put into. The village mixed use, much lighter in terms of its impact, intended for areas of the city that are, again, along transportation corridors, but are identified as sort of commercial nodes that exist in larger, predominantly residential areas. The base density, therefore, is a lot less, 25 units per acre, again, with additional increases possible if you do certain things like adding affordable housing or additional amenities. The parking that's required in the VMU zone is considerably higher than that of the CMU zone. I'm going to go to the parking slide and I'll come back to that reduction of commercial, just as long as we're talking about it. Studio units in the CMU zone, we're proposing 1.15 spaces per unit, 1.5 spaces for 1 bedroom, 1.85 spaces for 2 bedrooms, and 2.5 spaces per dwelling unit in the 3-bedroom units. By contrast, in the village mixed use, 1.25 for the studios, 1.5 for the 1 bedrooms, again, and 2.15 per unit in the 2 bedrooms, 2.65 per dwelling unit in the 3-bedroom units. Again, so your overall parking requirement will depend on your mix of bedroom counts. But in general, this is a significant increase from what we've had in the other zones. It's a significant increase from the other zones as they are, and a very significant increase from what they were previously, what we're proposing tonight. And we'll get to those in a moment as well. In the village mixed use zone, we are proposing that there be an allowance for reducing the commercial. We'll go back to a slide here. Again, this is kind of more the village mixed use environment that you would imagine. It's a good illustration of what you'd hope that we would achieve. And it's not as high a volume corridor that it would be on. It's not as intense a commercial activity because it's just a node existing in a larger residential area. So their opportunities to provide significant amounts of commercial are less. We would calculate it the same way that we require it for all of the zones. Principal street frontage requires commercial at a certain depth for a certain percentage. And we get that number and then allow them in this proposal to reduce that number if they need to, based on providing, again, different open space and amenities or affordable housing. So we get some benefit that makes that mixed use a more impactful mixed use rather than the commercial, because we are losing the commercial that generally provides that impact. The reason that the way that we would anticipate these zones being applied also written into the purpose statements is that we would want to consider them on 3-acre sites or greater. Smaller sites might be appropriate as infrastructure is built in, as these mixed uses start to succeed and create need for smaller properties. But these codes aren't going to respond as well for very small properties. And master site plans are important for a lot of reasons that we wanted to address. They were concerns of the council back in February when this was instituted, the TLUR.
Jared, so none of these are above 3 or below 3 acres?
No, these we would recommend considering these, any zone changes that were requested for these 2 zones we're talking about,
Correct.
the VMU and CMU zones,
3 and above.
on only 3-acre sites or greater.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. I often forget to talk about that and assume that it's part of the purpose statements. They're kind of the first 3 sections of these zones deal with where they ought to be applied and how you ought to consider whether they should be applied or not. So any application for a master site plan and any development, mixed use development under the way that we would be considering this would require that master site plan in these 2 zones would have to be accompanied at its outset by a traffic impact study, a parking analysis for us to measure against those standards that we've instituted, an adequate public utilities and facilities review done by the city or whatever. In some of these instances, it would be Cottonwood Sewer or whoever else, but a public facilities and utilities review, and possibly a public services review, police, fire, parks, depending on how much impact it was felt they might have on those kind of services. That's to make the application. And once the application comes in, the reason we want to see these zones applied to 3 acres and greater so that we can have the kinds of developments that ought to happen and really serve as good anchors for mixed-use development in those areas and really connect well to their environments. And the master site plan requirements that we put in place in 2019 really do a good job of that, considering building orientation, considering central features, adding central features to the sites, linked pedestrian walkways, and it's not in the slide here, but those pedestrian walkways are supposed to consider linkages to other potential development sites nearby or adjacent as well. And then they ought to be approved in conjunction with a master site plan agreement. That master site plan agreement, the tenets of that agreement would control phasing, for example, how much commercial gets built when, and how much residential is allowed to be built before that commercial is in place. In these cases, either built or rehabilitated, depending on the site. A lot of these will be commercial buildings that might have been sitting vacant for a bit. How much residential do we allow to be built before that commercial space is divided up and filled or rehabilitated in some other fashion on the site? That all should be controlled very carefully, and the only way to do that is with that master site plan agreement. It's like a development agreement. The Planning Commission, in the review of the master site plan itself, would set up those components and the requirements they thought were appropriate, and then send it to you as a city council to review and say, yeah, that's what ought to happen, or make adjustments as you see needed. So these are the cases that you would see developments themselves, not just the requests for rezones. And in every case for the VMU and CMU zones, you would see development requests in that form of that master site plan agreement, not just the zone change at the outset. And we can talk about it if we need to, but this is just a snip from a project that was done where some of these, where these components of the master site plan came into play and really produced a better site plan overall. let's go on and talk about some of the existing mixed-use zones and the proposed changes. Do you have any questions about the VMU and CMU at this point before we move on to the other portions? Okay. The existing mixed-use zones, as we talked about, the Murray City Center District and the Transit-Oriented Development Zone and the mixed use. I'm going to go over a couple of slides that have references to both the TOD and the MCCD together because they are very similar, and we've proposed mostly the same changes to those two zones. The mixed-use zones changes are a little more extensive. So let's go through the MCCD and the TOD first. First of all, the Transit-Oriented Development Zone, that's fire clay, what people commonly refer to as fire clay, and you can see that. I think I got most of the district in that shot. You can see the track station right here. And most of the properties that are in this zone are either right adjacent to or very close to that track station. You have Main Street on the east, Fire Clay Avenue right down the middle. Residential parking requirements have been increased in this zone. They were previously tied to your distance to the station. There were some reductions for being next to the track station. We have removed those from the code. So it's important to remember we've raised the parking requirement overall in every case, but we've also removed any concerns about reductions based on your distance from this or that or the other. We wanted to make the parking easy to understand, so we tried to build in everything that we could. The residential density, we've left alone at 100 units per acre in this zone. We've not seen developments over 80 to the acre in this area. We haven't seen any over about 80 to the acre in the city generally, but we've left it at 100 units per acre here. There are only a few sites left to redevelop and develop, and so we've left that alone. And it is all, like I said, right adjacent to that track station, so the density feels appropriate. Ground floor commercial is required in this zone. It wasn't originally. In 2015, there was a lot of development there already. In 2015, considering a couple of new developments, planning staff approved or proposed, and you all approved, a requirement that commercial be added to the frontage of buildings along Main Street and Fire Clay Avenue for 40 feet along those principal streets. The MCCD zone, the residential parking requirements, again, have been increased, and we'll look at a slide in just a moment, and we can talk about those two different increases. They are exactly the same increases proposed in both zones. The reductions have been removed for different, one of the reductions we didn't really talk about, but bicycle parking is required in all of these zones as well. When you build one of these projects, you have to produce a certain amount of parking. You have to provide a certain number of bicycle spaces as well, storage, bicycle racks. There were reductions for parking, for vehicle parking based on bicycle parking. They weren't significant, but we removed those as well. So you still have to provide the bicycle parking, though. I want to make sure that's clear. We didn't remove bicycle parking, just the reduction of vehicle parking based on it. So if that's not boring enough, I can keep talking about it, but I'll move on to the next part. Okay. Residential density remains 100 units per acre in this zone under this proposal, but it drops to 80 units east of State Street in recognition that State Street is a significant barrier, and those properties are a significant distance from the track station. Ground floor commercial is required again at 40 feet depth, but only along principal streets. That is a change. We used to require ground floor commercial in every development in the MCCD. We have reduced that by saying only along principal streets. Most streets in this zone that have the ability to be redeveloped have principal street frontage, but still, it's only required along the principal streets: State Street, 4800 South, Vine Street, Box Elder. Let's talk about the density and the parking. Again, the density is this lower table. That's pretty simple. 100 in both zones except for east of State Street in the MCCD. The parking, again, one stall, one parking space per unit if it's a studio unit. 1.05 if it's a one-bedroom unit, 1.5 if it's a two-bedroom unit, and then it jumps to 2.5 for 3 bedrooms and up. When we can talk about this in the other slides as well, but I'll talk about it here because it's where we are. The big difference that we saw in the study that we had done was in the 2 and 3 bedroom units, and the most significant at the 3 bedroom unit level. In the MCCD zone, for example, and I've removed the comparison slide, but the MCCD zone's previous requirement was one space per one unit, regardless of how many bedrooms were in that unit. We did not propose going to one space per bedroom, but in effect, at 3 bedrooms plus, that's the basic requirement for multifamily that's common in Murray and really throughout the state of Utah. 2.5 spaces per unit is a multifamily standard, ubiquitously. So this is in
Jared, let me ask you a question real quick. Are there any that you found that are higher than that?
I'm sorry.
For 2.5 parking.
that are parked higher than that?
Or I mean, in the vicinity, not up in Park City or wherever.
No, not really. No, we actually go to 2.65 in the VMU. That's the highest.
Okay.
There are some places where guest parking might take that 2.5 a little higher, but 2.5 kind of has the guest parking built in. In your standard kind of multifamily zoning parking requirement that's been in effect for 1 million years everywhere in Utah, the unit has 2 bedrooms and the half a space is for the guests.
Okay.
We tried to not, and there are a lot of codes that we looked at for parking requirements in looking at this that break that out and say, well, the requirement is 1.85 for a 3-bedroom unit or for a 2-bedroom unit, 1.5 for a 2-bedroom unit, but you have to provide 0.15 spaces for every unit in guest parking. And that's nice, but it's an unnecessary distinction. If that 0.15 doesn't change, then just add 15% to all of your calculations and call it good. So we built the guest parking into these.
Thanks.
Again, trying to make it as simple to read for developers and us and everyone as well.
Hey, Jared, with a mixed use, what is the parking regulation for the commercial? That would be shared.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that would be shared, when the commercial's closed.
Right. So the shared parking is the main point of these downtown zones, the more transit oriented zones. It varies just slightly. It's basically about 1 to 300 for retail and commercial. The MCCD is our lowest. That's at 1 to 500 for commercial, and we've left that as it is, based on public parking that will be available in the downtown, generally speaking, as well. So there's more shared parking, and it's more events oriented. We're hoping people, generally speaking, use that transit more often. So 1 to 500 for the commercial and the MCCD. In the others, it's 1 to 300 or 1 to 330 of net usable space.
Okay, so that's square feet.
And that's of square feet, and that's ubiquitous to all of the zones.
God, now I got to look up ubiquitous.
Sorry, it's apparent. The people that work in my office with me tell me I have words of the day, and apparently that's my word of the day. So I will not say it anymore at this point. But that's common to all of those, except for the MCCD. It's slightly different. And the hope is that in those zones there is some crossover from that commercial parking. There's some use of that commercial shared use. That's the hope. And there are a lot of in a lot of parking regulations. There are a lot of reductions all those reductions based on your proximity to the station, et cetera. Those are all based on the hope that shared parking really does its job. So you take this number, and it's already lower than normal standards, and you reduce it even further. We didn't feel like in our negotiations with Public Works and their concerns about parking, and everyone else that we talked to in the city, and frankly looking at consultants' work, we didn't feel like it was the right moment to make that change. So we removed those reductions. It's a significant increase, but we feel like it's not unwarranted, at least for now. There might be a time in the future when we would want to propose lower standards. Right now is not that time for us. Lower standards, that sounds wrong. Lesser numbers. I never advocate lower standards for people. So are there any questions about the MCCD and the TOD before I move on to the mixed use one? It's a little more involved just because it has the sub-districts. Anything? Okay.
Wait,
Oh,
I
yeah,
just still have to make a comment on the parking. Sure. I mean, I really think for the 2-bedroom, it needs to be increased. And for the 1-bedroom, it needs to be increased for the reasons that I've mentioned ad nauseum.
Right.
Because things are so expensive now, apartments are so expensive that people often have to have roommates. With a roommate or a partner comes a car. We live in Murray, not in Portland, or a larger city where people still use their vehicles and love their vehicles and the flexibility it gives them. And I think they're gonna come to these places and they're going to bring their vehicles. And that concerns me because it also requires then that the city has to provide police and fire and all those things that, come with parking issues, parking down, parking on the street. I mean, it can cause a lot of problems.
Talking about enforcement, right?
Right.
Because it should self-regulate in theory, the
I know it's all,
themselves.
yeah.
It should be that you move into a place that has you're allotted 2 spaces or 1 space, and you pay for an extra space, and only a certain number of people are going to be able to pay for the extra space because there aren't necessarily 2 per unit. And most cases we're going to be at about 2 per unit when it's all said and done with shared parking. But again, it should self-regulate in theory, but it does push.
I know.
It does necessitate enforcement. Yes.
We've had bad experiences here in Murray, and so I'm wanting to learn from those.
Sure.
And so that's my concern. And I'll bring it up every time.
I appreciate it.
And Jared, share, go on, but with Diane's concern, you know where she's talking about. Share why this would be different.
Let me do that.
Okay.
So I've got a slide here handily, actually, that wasn't intended for this, but it makes some sense. And I'll tell you the planner in me's version of why I think it's okay in the downtown zones. This is Fireclay. These apartments here, I'm not sure how many units there are altogether. Well, there's 601 in the complex. I think there's more than that altogether. Close to 1,000 altogether. These were built with a couple of fatal flaws. Designed and approved and built with a couple of fatal flaws. One of them being that the on-street parking that generates enforcement issues was counted in the totals. The other being that the totals were like 0.75 spaces per unit, regardless of the number of bedrooms in those units. And there are lots of 3-bedroom units in those apartments. That was a recipe for parking problems, absolutely. But they're probably, at the risk of sounding dismissive of it as a concern, they're not a good example of any of these other kinds of units. For example, these are parked at 0.75. We applied the normal parking requirements that we have that are significantly less than what we're proposing in the TOD to these 2 complexes right here, the Metro at Fireclay. We don't see the same kinds of issues from those apartment complexes. We haven't seen the same kinds of issues arising with on-street parking. There is parking on the street, absolutely, and it's used extensively. But that's kind of what we want. Every square foot of space that's taken up for the emergency situation or the worst case scenario is wasted for every other significant benefit that it could give you. So that on-street parking being used, in my mind, is not a bad thing as long as it's not spilling out and double parked and the kind of problems that you can anticipate if we're severely underparked like we are here. So keeping all that in mind, we have still raised the parking standards from that TOD zone. For 1-bedroom units to 1.05 and 1.5 for 2-bedroom units. That's still a significant increase. And I feel like my opinion is that down in the downtown zones and in the ones that are more truly oriented to the transit, these numbers, remember, they're per bedroom unit or per unit, but they're mixed in with these others. There'll be some people that have a 3-bedroom unit that don't use the 2.5 stalls that they're allotted.
I don't have a problem with the TOD. It's the MCCD.
Okay.
I get that. I understand the reasoning for the TOD, and that makes sense. But the MCCD is my concern.
I just wanted to add to the MCCD. We also, and this was brought up to me today in conversation, was we have city center. I mean, we're planning on having a city center around in MCCD. And with that being said, we have a theater that currently right now we would like to see, restored and developed and whatnot. And then this block will then become something, whatever it is. The hopes is this parking should be sufficient for that, including housing. It doesn't seem like it's enough. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that of the future? I mean, as it sits now, how does Block 1, maybe Evelyn coming in and with Murray City Hall, where does parking go? I mean, I know Mike Todd's not going to be happy if they all go behind Desert Star. So where do people park? Right now, it just seems like it's a problem. We're looking at something that can happen in MCCD as it did in TOD.
It's a great question, and it's a legitimate concern and consideration. The hope is that in the downtown, I'm gonna be annoying and go back to a slide.
I'm going to just address the Murray Theater. If the city wants to renovate and utilize Murray Theater, it needs to plan for parking for Murray Theater. And it would not be
a wise expectation for any private property around here to accommodate parking for that. So as we move forward with renovating the Murray Theater, we will have to take that into consideration. And when we sell this property, when this property develops, we may have to retain a piece of it and build a parking garage. We may have to partner with whoever develops it to build a parking garage to accommodate for that. But that's something that would be addressed at the time when the theater is redeveloped, when this property is redeveloped. It's certainly not something right now that we're planning on incorporating into that 48th and State Street project. They're looking at parking their project based on the parking ratios that are in place right now. So,
And I totally understand that. I'm concerned about MCCD as a whole. Those are just a few examples, but if we're looking at this as a whole, why would we not consider that?
So, yeah, as a whole, I think just to build on that, these kinds of transformations, this is from the CMU slide, right? But this is the same kind of thing we're talking about with downtown. We're talking about redevelopment and revitalization, and those things don't happen overnight. You can't expect to see a whole bunch of changes. And the best investments we could make would be in public parking in the downtown. We want to draw people into the downtown. We want to have a reason to be there. Those are the kind of investments we should be looking at making, and they will make up for some of that difference. We believe that they will. I guess in the end, if we need to make adjustments to that parking, that's where we are. But the analysis and the parking study that we had done was actually specific to the MCCD, and these numbers are in line with that, slightly above them actually. So we feel confident in them as staff. I don't know what else to say about that.
well, I do want to go back and talk just a little bit about, we have learned from the past. And I think when we talk about the parking issues that Murray has experienced, specifically most of the time we're referring to the Fireclay area. And I went over these numbers, I don't know if it was late last year, earlier this year, but essentially the Avita, the parking over in Fireclay was short 203 spots. It needed 823. They counted 203 on-street parking spots into those parking needs. And that's really where I think the lesson has come from, is that we no longer count on-street parking into our parking ratios. That's been eliminated and has been for years. And essentially the project over there then, because of that, was underparked by 25%. And that's what you're seeing every day. When people call and complain, that's the reason why we're getting those complaints. We also increased the parking ratios from what they were, which I think they were like 0.75, 0.85. And what we're recommending to you is much higher than what we had over there. So just a couple points on that. And it's hard to move past that. It's hard to remember, because I think for the most part, none of us were around when that was approved and when those parking ratios were put in. I mean, when was the TOD put into place? In the early 2000s? I was probably still in grad school. And yeah, so it's hard for us to remember why it was that way, but I do think it's important to point out that we have definitely learned from that. No on-street parking ratios are counted. And, we've increased those parking ratios. And what we have moved towards with what we're presenting to you this evening is more in line with the per bedroom, which does make more sense versus just a straight across the board, no matter how many units there are.
Can I just jump in for a sec?
Yeah.
So I just want to say, as having some of those lesson learned properties in my district, that's such a huge issue. But I really do feel like the city has learned a lot from it, and seeing the information from the studies, what other properties in similar cities are requiring, the shift that we've made in code, and then also, in this specific zone, I feel really comfortable with this parking amount. And I feel like having that extra burden of having listened to, the 1,000 units that are in those apartments yell at me personally before I was even elected for it. I was like, oh gosh. But this is above, it's sounding to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like these recommendations are above the limit for best practice even. And we're not Portland. We're not, we don't have the amazing infrastructure. We don't have trolleys in San Francisco where we can just hop on and all that. But this isn't that level of parking requirement. This is far beyond that, is my understanding.
Yeah, so we did have an independent, we asked Fair and Peers to do a parking study for the 48th and State Street project. They did an analysis and they came back with the Urban Land Institute parking ratios. And we based everything, because MCCD is our city center. We have Front Runner, we have Tracks, we have Blue Line, we have Red Line. We based everything essentially off of those ratios, but we increased everything. So even, according to the best practices or the Urban Land Institute, we are higher in all of our zones than what the parking analysis came back at. And Doug mentioned earlier, but we spent quite a bit of time internally as staff back and forth trying to figure out what would be the best ratio to put forward. And it took a lot of work, but we got to a point where Public Works and Planning maybe were equally as unhappy with them as we were happy with them. And so all just aside, we feel like they may be a little bit high, maybe for now, but come 10 years from now, when transit is more accessible, more usable, maybe that's when it would be more appropriate to have lower parking ratios. But right now, for the here and now, they are a little bit high because we don't want to have some of the spillover onto our city streets. It does create issues with public safety access, with parking enforcement. And so we worked really hard, as Doug mentioned, we worked really hard to bring a unified recommendation to you for each of these zones. So for what it's worth, Public Works Engineering, we're comfortable with these numbers. CED Planning, we're comfortable with these numbers. We could do a whole workshop on parking in and of itself, but I do feel like if we start going above and beyond what we have proposed to you, the outcome won't be more parking. The outcome will be less development. And if that's truly what you're seeking, that you would rather trade development for more parking, then that's your prerogative. But there are property owners, developers here in the audience tonight that will tell you what we have put forward is way too high. We don't feel that way as staff. And so, that's obviously at the end, that's your decision. You'll have to be comfortable with it. But we do feel like as staff that we worked really hard to not just take the easy answer, which was the study results, but to work collectively to get a consensus on what we're recommending to you.
I just wanted to respond to what you had said about we wouldn't have anybody who would want to develop. We're one of the last cities in the county that has space to develop along instead of on the outskirts. So we really have an advantage as a city to say, this is what we want. This is what we would like it to look like. And I know parking is kind of our hang up, but the fear is we don't want to happen at Fireclay to happen in other parts of the city, including MCCD or in other areas, or really for any developer to have a failed project and the city be, getting the repercussions of citizens being upset about that. Again, we have a huge advantage as a city because we are central to the county in transit. you know, we were very lucky to have transit here. So that's really all I have to say about that. I see us as really having an opportunity to say, this is what we need. And our citizens say the same thing. And we've all heard from them. Go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
I want to take us in another area unless you want to stick to this parking. I want to take us to the area of specifically the point, 53rd. Go into that, Jared, just a little bit. The concern we had about how many apartments could go in next to the park and all that stuff. So go into that, where that would benefit with this new zoning that you guys, mixed use, that you've come up with that specific one.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's what you're going to do next.
I wasn't. So I'm glad. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is just the slide about the CMU. So that's the zone that would most likely correspond to the point at 53rd. Thinking about State Street corridor as a whole is kind of where we took our numbers and our inclinations in that zoning from. And you have to remember, again, this is an area that is commercial that needs to adapt as time moves on, as the economy changes. So we want to give them the ability to add units, but they don't need to be excessive. The previous zone that was available to them was either the MCCD at 100 units per acre or the MU zone, which went up to 8. I think they were within the 80 unit per acre radius there. So that felt frightening. And what we were hearing from Point at 53rd was that what they needed to add was, a few hundred units, maybe. They didn't need to do 800 or 900 units. That wasn't what they were looking for, because they have a lot of commercial space that they want to keep. They just want to be able to add units on site to keep up with the changing economy. So basically, on a site like this is kind of mirroring what Point at 53rd would be. The redevelopment would include housing units that haven't been there previously and commercial uses out on the main street. So what you'd see would probably be 35 or 40 units to the acre. And that would be enough that they'd be able to add to the site and make it viable going forward in the future. You'd probably see a lot more commercial than you're really required. If I had to guess, I would say they would probably easily meet that. This is the residential density bonus table, okay? So they get 40 units to the acre is the first bonus level. They would probably already meet that at 15% with their plans with the commercial they're going to rehabilitate and keep and just add a few units. They'd probably automatically get to that 40 units per acre if they really wanted it. I'm not sure they really want that, but they could do that. That would mean maybe around 400 units on the site, 380, something like that. But again, it's tied up with other things too. The base density is what it is, or the residential density allowance is what it is, but that gets tempered by how much commercial you want to lose. And you have really good frontage on State Street, 44,000 cars a day, and a lot of people at IHC and things like that. So that site's not going to want to give up its commercials for residential. They just want to add residential to stay viable. So you're going to see 350 units or so there.
Thank you.
And more parking, actually, because they have parking decks already. They'll probably have to add another deck to get to the levels they need.
Could we just reiterate what it was before? So it would have been close to 1,000 units, right?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
It would have been, I can't remember the exact number, but it would have been 800 and something.
It was 850. And it's interesting that we've been on the council a long time, and it's just amazing that I remember, especially Diana and I would say, yeah, we want to trust the developer. We get that. But if it sells or something happens in that zone, it's changed, then someone comes in and changes it, even though the intent was not to do that. And it's just amazing. We didn't do this. Is there anything that would hinder us from doing that? I mean, what was the reason why we never did do that before?
Why we didn't
have a new zoning for this mixed use?
Just time and staff bandwidth.
Okay.
And the TLUR didn't really help that, but we're here. Time and bandwidth notwithstanding. And it does create its own issues. We haven't had the kind of time we'd like to.
And we see these in other cities, you said, in other places that have these. Because that's been a frustration. I won't speak for you, but just a frustration that we've had and thinking like, we just got to throw it out there and hope they do what they said. And so this is one of the most important things for me on this. So
we basically cut this basically takes the residential density and cuts it in half. We talked to a lot of developers in this corridor, in this area, and feel like that's reasonable for them, but it's a lot more reasonable for us. And it's tied up in our public facilities as well. Again, that public facilities review, that's an important component here. We had concerns about sewer. We actually managed to get those addressed and feel like we're okay, but these numbers, again, are acceptable there. So there's a lot of moving parts that went into creating these density levels and these parking levels. It took a lot of consideration from other things to get them in the right place. But we feel like these levels we can handle. So you'll see a significant change over time on that site.
Big time.
But it'll be a good change and a manageable one. That was kind of the goal. It has to be a good rehabilitation, but a manageable one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I think also it was really helpful to do the moratorium so we could reevaluate that. And I think you've done a good job with that. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me see. I'm going to take us forward to where we were when we started talking about parking and see if we can move on from there. Any other questions we ought to get out of the way in the moment that we're okay? Because I'm fine for all the questions. That's great. I'd rather do it during than other. So the Murray Central mixed use, the first thing to note is that it used to just be called the mixed use zone, really just to avoid the confusion that creates with developers who know mixed use zoning, and we named it mixed use. It's like the Band-Aid question, what are we really talking about? This is the Murray Central mixed use. It's based upon that proximity to the central station, which is a great and important station for us. So Murray Central mixed use. It also gets rid of a bunch of hyphens for me, which is good. The densities in this zone, and we'll get to it on the next slide, but this zone we wanted to propose a significant change to, in that we want to divide it into two sub-districts. They're not new zones, they're not new individual zones. The zone is still written as a single comprehensive zone, but for purposes of parking and density allowances and a couple of other small considerations, the two districts are important. And so the tables are divided into two. And your allowances for residential and your requirements for parking are different based on your east or west locations. But they do range between the two of those districts from 40 to 80 units per acre based on your proximity to the transit station, the platform at Murray Central. And then we are we're proposing an allowance for reduction of commercial, like we talked about with the village mixed use zone, more significantly in the west district than in the east sub-district. Main challenges for development in the west district are providing accesses to sites and providing commercial that we would require. It doesn't seem like a significant requirement, principal streets and 40-foot depth, et cetera, but it can add up really fast if you're not a really well located spot. If you don't have those 40,000 cars a day on State Street, it's hard to make it as a regular shop in some places, much less as a shop underneath a bunch of apartment units. So we wanted to be cognizant of that. And basically all that means is that as the mixed usiness, that's the best term I can come up with, of a site goes down, then those parking levels need to go up. It becomes more of a traditional apartment complex. More residential, less commercial, those parking requirements are going to go up because you have less of that shared use, right? So as the site gets less intense as a mixed-use site, we wanted to recognize that. And just to point out why we proposed the sub-districts. These are the proposed sub-districts. Everything in the current mixed-use zone, west of the freeway, west of I-15, would be in that west sub-district. Everything east of it, in that current mixed-use zone, would be in the east sub-district. These properties generally have better access to the transit station. We proposed some allowance for reduction of commercial, recognizing that not all of them have great access to it or great frontage on properties or on principal streets for that matter. So some reduction, but not as much as in the mixed use west. These zones, these districts, roughly correspond to our general plan's land use category, mixed use east of Commerce Drive and professional office and office west of Commerce Drive and the freeway. Now, I want to make one quick point without getting too into detail about it. The general plan's designation of these was pre-COVID and pre the office market tanking and crashing, and we don't know what's going to happen there. We're not proposing that everybody that's property is in the mixed-use west zone, that mixed-use area on the west side, be rezoned to these areas, or to office and professional office. We would support it if they wanted to, because the general plan already says to. It was, rezoned to office. My lips are really dry. Office and professional office, and actually a portion of it to residential medium density. We're not proposing they be removed from the mixed use zone. They would still be in mixed use zoning, recognizing that things have changed since 2017 when we thought these were kind of the ways we would want to go. That hasn't panned out. It's time to rethink that as well. but it still bears. These are not as good of areas for mixed use development as the east side mixed use. So hence the sub-districts. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about how we wanted to divide those up? Let me talk about what it really means then in terms of the code itself. So the mixed use zone gets renamed MCMU and it gets divided into sub-districts, and just like the other zones, its residential density allowance, generally speaking, goes down in recognition that we were probably looking at sites like Point at 53rd that was close to the station, but didn't really warrant 80 units per acre. Within an eighth of a mile, the MCMU East subdistrict, within an eighth of a mile of that transit platform, we would allow up to 80 units per acre. That's a city block. If you're close, that should be close enough to walk. If you won't block a block, I don't know how to help you. And that's all we've got. 80 units per acre. As it goes down from there, a quarter of a mile, 65 units per acre, half a mile, 50, and 40 at the outside of the half of a mile. Half a mile is the kind of the pedestrian shed, what people will put up with in terms of a walk often, generally speaking. If it's something you've got to do every day, a half a mile, you might do it. More than that, you're not as likely to do it. It's not that you won't, not that people won't, but more of them are less likely to do that. So half a mile is kind of our cutoff point. And as you can see in the MCMU West, what we are proposing is that the density be 40 units per acre, period. There are not sites in that area that you can easily walk a half a mile with current configurations to the station. And all of them are not pleasant half a miles even when you get to them in terms of walkability. So it's not a real walkable site or area. And so we propose 40 units per acre in there. Sorry, I missed one thing here. Additionally, too, this was mentioned in the pre-meeting. I just want to hit it again just to make sure we cover it. Even in these, in the MCMU East subdistrict, I got to get used to saying that. Let's say you're a quarter of a mile from the station platform. We measure that in the code that we've drafted as the distance measured as a straight line or in a radius from your property's frontage with the street to the station platform itself. That seemed the most appropriate measurement. But even given that, if we can't measure a walking distance from your project, from that point where you exit your project and walk around to the station that's less than a half a mile, 40 units per acre is your allowance. Because again, you're not going to reap the benefits of that proximity to the station that would warrant the higher densities. And 40 units per acre, just to put it in context, high density housing in the valley, in Salt Lake and the area around it has been considered 20 to 25, 30 units per acre for a long time. These are still densities that are over what normal zones would allow in most cases. So just to keep that in mind. Parking, again, in these zones that are not as well, in this MCMU East, it's pretty good access to the transit station. So 1 for the studios, 1.25 for 1 bedrooms, 1.5 for 2 bedrooms, and 2.5 for 3 bedrooms. Again, that's the normal kind of multifamily requirement, so no benefit there. And the same thing in the MCMU West that we proposed in the VMU zone, that village mixed use. It's really more of that kind of intensity. It's going to be more residential, less commercial, so you're not going to reap those benefits. 1.25, 1.5, 2.15, and 2.65 for the 3-bedroom plus units. Reduction of commercial, I think I mentioned, we're proposing that we do allow some reduction of commercial based on, again, adding, reducing your density voluntarily, for example, adding open space and amenities, adding affordable housing. In the MCMU East, we would allow them to go down to 60% under this proposal. So we figure you have a 10,000 square foot commercial requirement. If you'll do extra things for us, we can get you all the way down to only a 6,000 square foot commercial requirement. But to get that, you're doing a lot of things that make the site a better site, a more mixed use site in spite of that lack of commercial. And then just even more drastic versions of that for that MCMU West, all the way down to 30% of the commercial. So again, that same example, 10,000 square feet figured all the way down to 3,000 square feet, a pad site, single pad site for your development. But to get that, you got to do some significant things to make it a better mixed use site in spite of that lack of commercial. That's the basic premise there, okay? Any questions about that? Same kind of principle in the VMU zone, but it's just applied a little differently there. The Planning Commission, I think we mentioned, did vote on this on July 15th, 5-0 to forward the recommendation of approval to the council. They did make a couple of slight changes. I think we mentioned in the pre-meeting, they removed the drive-through allowance in the TOD zone, kind of a point of honor almost. I'll say they have wanted it out for a long time. We felt like that was appropriate. Not a lot left to develop there. It still exists. You can still do drive-throughs in the other zones. just with considerations for how they're placed and integrated. And they did remove, they did add language about, they wanted the same language that exists in our current mixed-use zones about building formation, clear glass on ground floors, architectural features every 30 feet, et cetera, to be added to those, the VMU and CMU zones. So we added that in. And I'm forgetting one, but there's another one. Outdoor storage, not allowed. Thank you. Melinda is the outdoor storage reminder person of the day. So outdoor storage is not that's not a good thing in mixed use environments where you have people and contractors' yards, et cetera. That's not allowed in any of our current mixed use zones. Also not allowed in the VMU and CMU zones. So they have to take that into account as they're asking to add units. They're going to need to make sure that none of their users need that kind of consideration. And that's our presentation.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have questions?
I'd like to revisit the public services review, and I'm wondering why you say that the city may require a review of the project's impact upon services, including police, fire, schools, parks, and others. When would you not want to have that?
Well, in general, and so there's a little bit of it's a little bit misleading to say parks and fire and police and schools wouldn't be considered, because they would. Responding to a project application, we always send the school district notification that we're doing something and ask for their input. Lots of these kinds of projects would be doing master site plan approval, where we're going to want those inputs. Fire reviews everything we do, no matter what. The question is really, and police as well gets notified of what we're doing. The question is really other kinds of services that we've not considered. And not just that, but the timing of when we would ask for that review. So if the council in reviewing a site saying we're gonna rezone you to CMU zoning, for example, you're gonna know with that site if you think that we need to consider upfront the fire considerations or the police considerations or youth services abilities or something like that. And you can let us know when this comes in for master site plan approval, we want that to be a consideration. It didn't seem necessary for every single application, but there could be those cases where we felt like it was. But to add it as a definite requirement wouldn't be a problem. We just make notifications to people and have it be part of the review. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to make the distinction, and Jared led into that, but every time we have a zone change, a general plan amendment, site plan, a conditional use permit, all of the departments are given an opportunity to weigh in, police, fire. So each department reviews that. I think what we're really alluding to here is a more formal type of a study that we could require if we felt like it was warranted.
Would these be impact fees that would go in tied to this, or is
no, impact fees would be something that
separate
would be,
though, right?
Yeah, separate.
Okay.
That just is, once they're approved and in place, they get applied to every new development at the building permit stage. So, but it could be. I'm kind of struggling to think of a scenario in which we may require that, but
I am too, but you never know when it's going to come up.
So we wanted to have the ability to require that if there was a scenario that came up that we're like, hey, it would really make sense to require some type of a more formal study. So it's not that we would bypass having departments review all of these applications. That's not the case. They do review them. They do weigh in. This would be, when we're talking about a traffic impact study, we're talking about they go out and get a consultant to do a study. They pay a fee. That study comes to us. We review it. We may accept it. We may say we don't agree with it. And so we're just really leaving the ability open for us to perhaps have some type of an opportunity for other services other than the traditional ones that we do, all the utilities, parking and traffic.
It says require a review, not an impact study specifically. So I'm just wondering, I think that would be a good idea that they are required to have the review in the project. I think that's important because it could slip through very easily. We may not review it.
We could absolutely, I mean, as long as, I think there's a way that we could say this is a public services review, and it just means that we're checking with all these people to see if there needs to be a certain level.
I think that's important.
Work on that. And if the council is amenable to providing us a planning and zoning impact fee, we absolutely accept, just to be clear.
I swear I can tell GL wants to say something.
You always think GL wants to say something.
You do. I'm looking at him.
Look, all I was going to say was Melinda hit it right on the head where she said a formal review. We do an internal review on all these things. We have a specific requirement in, I want to say PUDs, but I'm not sure where it is.
For the school district letter.
That requires someone to look at the school district, contact them, and talk about the impact. What we're talking about here is having, instead of police and fire come to the table and talk to us, having the developer look and say, this is our analysis of the impact on these, and then we review that analysis. There's a big difference, and that's why you don't want to require in every single case. You wouldn't need it. We'll know pretty much in our own review what we think is required, but there could be a time when we're a little bit hesitant to commit and say, you tell us what you think is required. There's that possibility.
Can I build on that for
Please.
one quick second? If I can just go through these points. For example, these are the requirements for the application to be made. So when it comes into our office, they call us up and say, we're coming in to bring this application in. If it's a master site plan application, it has to have a traffic impact study. There's no equivocating that. Traffic impact study, a parking analysis, the public use utilities and facilities review has to have already happened with our public works department and what other service providers there are. And then if it comes in as that application and we look at it and say, you know what, it looks like we're going to want a public services review from fire too. We hit the pause button. They do that because it's whenever it needs to be required. So it could be required at that point too if you don't want to require it up front as a formal review like Gio's saying. It's still there, and those guys would do that review. Any project that comes in, like Melinda and Gio have both said, gets those reviews developed as part of the development review committee. So if they feel like they need to do the formal deal, we can do that. Or if we catch it up front before that ever happens as well. Absolutely.
Does that answer your question, Diane?
Yeah, it does. I just don't want it to slip through. I think it's important, and I think that kind of evaluation is important. That we make sure it's done.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Dale.
Just listening to what GL said, I think we've got to be cognizant of thought. We don't want to get too far into the weeds because these are the policymakers. And they understand a lot more than we do. I think things like parking and stuff like that, like we're discussing, are one thing, but I think we've got a good track record of police, fire, everybody else making sure everything works before we put a shovel in the ground. So I appreciate the concern, but I think if we get too far into the weeds, we need to get a degree so we understand.
Well, let me continue in the weeds.
Go ahead, Diane.
I understand that we cannot require environmental considerations in terms, we can't require it, or green building, or that, because it's public development, it's private, not public, it's private. We can do it with public. But I think more encouragement would be helpful, because it's not mentioned very often, or I think maybe there's one sentence that encourages, green or environmentally responsible building practices. And so if we could encourage that a little more, I would really appreciate it. I think it's important that we do that and send that message that that's a value that
Could I address
Murray
this?
really cares about.
Just real briefly, let me say this. So what Jared has done in the last several months is incredibly difficult. And what he's done is taken those concerns we've expressed on the record and said, what can we do to make this better? Now what we're talking about are those fine-tuning points, right? So if you say to him tonight, go do this, and it's not one of those concerns, that's more time, that's more energy. It may not get done. That's the problem. And so what we can do is whatever you decide to pass, whether it's tonight, hopefully it's before the end of this temporary land use restriction, but whatever you do, there's time to come back to the council and talk about these philosophical issues, and then to tweak it and put things in if we think it's warranted. But what's happening is, and I think Jared knows this better than anybody else, when you start to draft an ordinance and you put a provision in, your mind has to go about 16 different directions to say, okay, what else does this affect? And you are running through this like an octopus, trying to figure out what all you've done by just making that one single change. And so when he's focused on the major things we looked at, which was public works and infrastructure, parking and densities, he's also peeling off. Now, for example, the affordable housing incentive, that is him trying to figure out how do we give an incentive for density, but keep density where we think you want it, right? To go further tonight or in the next week with something like that is very difficult to do. So we're not trying to dig our heels and say we're not going to do anything more. I'm just saying you're asking something that's not really possible, to go further into the weeds to those things that we can have discussions on at much more in depth would be more helpful, I think, in the future after you've passed something.
But GL, you told me that to get our issues out at this meeting, if we can.
Absolutely. I'm saying
so. That's what I was.
But don't have this expectation that everything can be addressed tonight or in the next week, because it can't be. We want to hear your issues. Absolutely. This is why we're talking about this tonight. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get everything that's on the table will come into the new ordinance.
So you're saying we can, just like you said earlier,
Sure.
we can tweak it down the road.
Throw everything
all
out
we want
tonight. Throw everything out so you don't go home thinking, I didn't get to talk about this. Throw it out there.
What I was doing.
Yeah.
But just realize that when Jared says, okay, I'll look at that, you're asking to do something that is really above and beyond and probably not possible in the time that we have.
Well, it's the time that we were allotted to
That is
kind
the
of
time.
really to go through it in the last 2 weeks.
Well,
So
what
we're
I think I remember saying 6 months at the beginning of this
Right.
is never enough time to do
Right.
it. It never is.
Yeah.
But that is what we have.
right.
Yeah. So I apologize if you thought I was saying to keep quiet. I don't mean that at all. Just realize what the expectations are of what we can actually get done.
And we do text amendments all the time. We'll have one coming before you on the 3rd where we changed the code 2 years ago. A question came up. We realized, you know what, we didn't get it right 2 years ago. So this isn't, I think part of what GL is saying is this isn't the only shot that we have here, but with this pre-prescribed amount of time that we've had, this is at this point really probably all we can do. We can still keep looking at these other issues in the future, but we may not be able to incorporate them in between now and the time you make a decision to approve what's before you. Some changes would be very easy, like removing drive-throughs from the TOD, which is what the Planning Commission did in their recommendation last Tuesday. A lot of these other things, like Jill is saying, the tentacles do reach out and impact other things, and there has to be a lot of forethought put in before we draft the language so that we don't inadvertently mess up something else. So we definitely want to hear what concerns you have, what other elements. I mean, what you just said about sustainability, I've written some notes down, and that's something that we can look at maybe further on down the line as we get an ordinance in place. We're back in business, but we realize, hey, there were a few things that we left on the table just because we couldn't address every single concern, every single issue that came up because there's just not enough time. it takes 90 days to process even a really small text amendment. Like this one with the temporary signs that you'll see on August 3rd in the Committee of the Whole. That came to us back in May with a question that Brooke brought up with the political signs and campaigns. And we're just now barely getting that in front of you, 90 days later. So, and that's a very simple, straightforward, this isn't 5 zones like this is. So, I would say let's continue the dialogue tonight. We'll make notes and we can figure out if we haven't addressed everything in what we have before you tonight, we can figure out in the future how to make those amendments to get those put in so that we have the ordinance and land use ordinance in place that you want it to be.
Yeah, and I think Rosalba's point is well taken because we really have not had a lot of time or opportunity to give you feedback about this. So,
Yeah, and that's the nature of a 6-month TLUR. It's a lot to try and pull off in 6 months, and but that doesn't mean that. You don't have to have a TLUR in place to make amendments to an ordinance. We do it all the time. So there's still ample time in the future, even after we pass these and get them in place, where we can make more changes.
I think this is really, really important because we're in the process of shaping our city and our downtown. And so I think we need to take this very seriously. And I think that's what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Any other comments, discussion?
No, I just want to hear from the people that are here. So.
One last thing, and I said it in Committee of the Whole. I would like a little bit more time in this, and whether that's a week or a week and a half, to really have a one-on-one even discussion with Melinda and Jared to better understand it. I feel personally that I haven't really been given that opportunity. And considering everything, I think you guys have worked really hard on this. And overall, I can't even imagine how much time you put into this. And I think it's great. I think it's what we need. It's of the time, but there's still a lot to consider. And that doesn't mean we don't believe in the property owners and their rights either. We do. I do personally. And I just want to make sure both sides, are considered and are at the table. And that's really a lot of the frustration, right, is the time. And GL's right. It was never going to be enough time, but we're given a big task in really shaping the rest at Murray for the future as well. And that's ways, I think, with a lot of us in our own way. So I will, if there's no other discussion or anybody else, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone have any comments? You can come forward. Jennifer has a sheet. You'll be given 3 minutes. She has a timer on our iPad that we will time you, and she'll let you know when you have 10 seconds left, right, Jennifer? Maybe? Okay, it'll go off. And please go ahead and state your name and address or business so we can put it in the record.
Can
Go
you hear
ahead.
me? Is this working, the mic?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. My name's Corey Brand. So good evening, council members, as well as mayor's office. I represent the owners of the Galleria project. So pretty much almost the entire MCMU West, if you think about it, if you look at the map, remaining developable land is pretty much the land that we own, which is about 27 acres. And let me just echo what's been said before. I understand from what the mayor's office said as well. I've talked to Doug, and I also appreciate Gil's comments as well. But I know the task that Melinda and Jared have taken on themselves in the last 6 months. It's big, but I also echo the same frustrations that you have. We literally saw this draft 9 days ago, and this is a huge impact for us. We've been on hold for 6 months. We had a project that was right there that we'd been through, and it was quite a bit more dense. If you knew the zoning of the old mixed-use zoning, there were 70 units an acre. We had a project plan with 2,100 units on this property. which was a stretch. And now this has been cut considerably down from that. And we've worked very closely with GSBS Architects, has been our primary architect for the last 18 months on this. You guys are familiar with GSBS, and they do great work, and they have the interest of Murray in mind, as we do as well. I've been developing now for 30 years, and I appreciate really, Rosalba, your comments as well about the fact that, you know, I've been doing this, and the stuff I've built and own, I want to continue to own. And so I don't have interest in building something that's not economically feasible and flipping this out into the market. I will be the owner and continue to be an owner in this Galleria development for years to come. So I know there's bad blood out there with regards to parking ratios, but I sent an email out that I believe you received just in the last couple of days, because it took us about a week to get our heads around everything and try to address what we believe are three key issues. So let me speak quickly to those. I know parking's a hot topic right now. Diane, I hear you on your comments. But if you look at all the parking ratios, the most punitive of the parking ratios is us on the West. We have the highest parking ratios. We don't want to underpark a site. If you look at Fire Clay and those projects that have been underparked, they are getting hurt the most. If you want to hurt somebody and keep rents low, make them underpark it, because people don't want to pay when they know they don't have any parking. And so it's a high number. It's higher than national standards and really what's needed. And I know we have a partner with Cottonwood Residential who's going to speak to it. They manage and own over 15,000 units. I think we need to listen to experts with regards to what's reasonable with regards to parking. We also aren't receiving any benefit or any credit. Every other zone gets benefit for location to transit. We have a future BRT station going right on our site, which is a rapid transit location. And we're literally probably 100 feet away from being a quarter mile from the map I sent you from tracks. And so if you watched AISU as the school who was in there for 5 years, they had a track up and down the hill on Vine Street. Is that already 3 minutes? Really? Am I that slow of a speaker? Holy cow.
Take 10 more seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, you've seen the letter. We have concerns with parking. We have concern with some of the language that was brought up earlier by Kat about the 3 stories being defined, not 35 feet, but you're saying 3 stories, which affects us. It impacts us negatively. We have a tiny corner that faces residential across what's now going to be a 5-lane road. So we'd like that amended. And the only other issue was, can't remember. So we had commercial, the defined use of educational services, which again, within your own zoning ordinance is listed as a service industry. It's not listed as a residential business. So those are our 3. I know if you adopt this tonight, hopefully this is something that you're going to hear us back very quickly with a project. Hopefully these are things that you guys will consider as part, again, as the primary owner and somebody's trying to put together a good project for.
Thank you so much, Corey.
Sorry, Rosalba.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. If you had questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Janice, come on up.
Hi, Council. Janice Strobel. And I really appreciate all the information that I've been able to gather in talking to Jared previous to this meeting. A question I hope can get answered is, will the fine-tuning text amendments that happen after this, as it is currently written, the proposal that's currently written, will those fine-tuning text amendments in the mixed-use zoning be a public hearing also? And then the next thing I ask is, if you do not vote tonight, if you will do a continuance of citizen comments and for the night that you do vote. I do ask that you do that. And then the other thing, in talking to Jared, and sorry, I don't have quite the voice, but the transition to a thriving mixed use takes years. The mixed use that has already been built here in Murray is filled, well, not filled. It's empty spaces, empty commercial spaces. The apartments go fast, but the empty commercial spaces are not happening yet. So what is going to be done to help mitigate the empty commercial space of the mixed use development until it does become thriving mixed use? Is there anything that can be done in the ordinance that can help mitigate all that empty space that will take years before it really works? Okay. Then public parking downtown. It is an issue. MCCD is all mixed use. So we have to talk about we want to have the downtown be a gathering place for the public. And if we don't talk about how that can happen, besides just everyone, you got to come on tracks. Well, people live on the east and west side. So how are we going to have downtown be a gathering place if we don't address how we're going to park the public to be able to want to come downtown? And I'm going to quote Jared from today. Best investments we could make would be in public parking downtown. Okay? That's Jared telling us that. Aren't you glad you said that, Jared? So, and then in the MCCD, and I know the master site plan maybe needs to be, in some cases, revised a little in the wording of what that all really entails. But when we go under 3 acres in downtown and say that they do not have to have a master site plan, I don't know if that's a very wise thing, because every single development that happens downtown, whether it's under 3 acres or not, is going to be mixed use, most likely, and it's going to impact downtown. So I think there needs to be, at least in the MCCD, some version of a master site plan for under 3 acres. And then open space, this hasn't been talked about much, but all mixed use classifications need to have some guidelines about mixed use open space, because children need places to play, people need places to go out and decompress. And I do ask too that a lot of time be spent quickly on the revisions and fine tuning, even though you put so much time into this already. Good job, guys.
Thank you, Janice. Anyone else? Go ahead. You can come on up. Yeah. Thank you. It was you. I don't think the fire chief wants to go.
I didn't know what the crowd behind me was up to. So
just remember to state your name and.
Yeah, I'm Tyler Morris. I work for Cottonwood Residential, the group that Corey Brand mentioned. Wanted to talk about the MCMU West site as he did. I won't kind of beat a dead horse and go through the points he did, but I just want to talk about it a bit from an operational standpoint and from what our group sees kind of across the country. As he mentioned, we manage about 50 apartment buildings across the country. Several of them here, many in the Southeast. We manage, very dense urban product, and we manage surface parked, garden style, very undense or dispersed apartments in that way. And as Corey mentioned, one of the worst things that we could do on the front end as we're developing is to underpark these deals. And it's fatal operationally because you have people that don't stay. So you have residents that move every time their lease comes up because they deal with these parking issues over and over and over again. So you're having to refill these apartments every year instead of every 2 or 3 years. It impacts your rents, it impacts your vacancy, it impacts your reputation in those markets. So, one of our primary focuses going into these developments or when we look to buy deals is making sure that they're adequately parked. What we think, from our experience across the board is adequately parked for this type of product is a touch above what's dictated for MCMU East and just slightly below what's laid out for MCMU West currently. So it's right in between. And one of the other points I would make, it's not far off, I guess is my point. And you guys have done a great job dialing it in to the right kind of bandwidth of where it should be. And it's just a small tweak that we think based on the unit mix that will go here will make the most sense. And that leads to another point is, given that the AISU site will be turned into another kind of charter school, we really value these sites that are integrated with schools and educational settings. But one of the things that comes with that is it's helpful to develop larger units, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, so you can have families with kids come in there. And Diane, I know this was a point you made earlier, a lot of those 3 bedrooms, you end up getting roommates and, 2, 3, 4 cars in some of those units. When you're close to an educational setting like this, you see a little bit less of that because you're having kids that are not of driving age. You're going to have 2 parents. You may have an older kid, but it's going to be more of that structure than what you see in a kind of like an urban setting. And I would just say one potential unintended consequence of going heavy on the parking for 3 bedrooms is you're just not going to get them. So people will, 3 bedrooms already get less rent per square foot than studios, 1 bedrooms and 2s. So what you're going to have happen is it's just going to skew the unit mix down to studios, 1s and 2s, because you'll be able to replace those, get rid of multiple units of parking, and then still end up with a similar density to what you're looking at. So, and again, for this site, like holistically, what we think makes sense, the 40 units, an acre is great. You get some townhomes, you get some garden stuff, you maybe get a structured parking piece in the middle, and you get a broad kind of array of what needs to be built to serve that area. So
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Corey. Anyone else? Go ahead, sir. Come on up. State your name, address, or district, I would say, and then Jennifer will have you fill out a form. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Foreman, can you hear me okay? Okay. Just listening, I had some thoughts that I might contribute to what you're trying to do in improving residential and business for downtown. It occurs to me that you might require buildings to be built stacked, including parking and then the residential above the businesses, and the parking and the residential above the businesses. And then on top of that, it would help cool the buildings and keep them more functional and give you open space by putting an open space layer on top of all of that as a sort of a small park on top of it. Those are a couple of thoughts that I had. And also the other thing is low income housing is in short supply in this entire valley, and anything that you can do to increase the low income housing to a rate where people who are already working 2 and 3 jobs just to make rent and food would be a fantastic thing.
Thank you. And follow up with Jennifer.
District,
Sorry, go ahead.
District 5. So
right.
that's my district.
Thank you. And Jennifer will give you a form. Anyone else? Did you? Oh, no? Okay. Thank you. Just state your name and.
Jesse Allen with GSBS on behalf of the 49th Street Galleria development. I just wanted to comment on one thing that was written in the letter that was sent to you from Corey Brand about the setbacks, to kind of clarify that a little bit. There's a part of the ordinance that if you're 100 feet from a single family residential zone, you can go up to 35 feet, but you're limited to 2 stories. And I understand why you would do that if you were directly adjacent to, say, the backyard of a single family, because you may want to try to eliminate that 3rd story looking down into the rear yard of a single family development. But one request that was made in the letter is that when you're across the street from a single family residential zone, that you are allowed to go to keep the 35-foot max. So not changing the height limit, but just allowed to fill up that space with that 3rd level. The logic is that you really wouldn't be able to see anything into a rear yard that you wouldn't be able to see from the street if you build up that 3rd level. So the request is to keep the height restriction when you're within 100 foot from the single family, but be allowed to build that 3rd level rather than being limited to 2 levels when it's across the street from that development. The only other thing I was going to say that Corey didn't quite get to was the open space that he's trying to accomplish with this project, continuing the trail, or putting in the trail next to the creek, and creating connectivity between that the creek and then over to Vine, and really adding a lot of trail amenity for Murray City, as well as providing open space in there that's consistent with the way that it was written, or I think intended. So those are the 2 clarifications I wanted to make. And thanks to Jared and Melinda for all their hard work and collaboration during this time. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. no one else has any other public comments, I'll go ahead and close the public comments portion of this hearing. And I'm going to take it back to the council. Brett, go ahead.
Oh, I'm looking at Kat and I'm thinking I'm going to let her go first. She
Oh,
is just
sorry.
ready to-
Do you want to?
I'm just sitting here thinking it's kind of what I figured. You know, if we're gonna so we're postpone this. I don't want to postpone it unless something different's going to happen in a week and a half or whatever, before the 2nd, is it? Is that one, the 1st, 2nd? Anyway, of August. I'd rather pass it and tweak it, but if we feel like there's something that we need to do differently that's going to be huge during that time, I get that also. Maybe I'll have some questions for Jared and Melinda after we talk about it a little bit.
I'll just glad you went first, because that's very much where I'm feeling is I think that there are wish lists that we have as far as this in the long term. And I think there's a ton of value in continuing to think about that and maybe like making a list and maybe doing a further down the road workshop and like adding things to it. But I think for the sake of needing to get something on the books, I think that you've done an amazing job. I love the center and village distinctions. I think the different subgroups of the mixed use are very thoughtful and strategic. I appreciate the initiative to include affordable housing. I think you've answered a ton of questions about concerns. I think the way we are determining how and where mixed use can go makes a lot of sense, very reasonable to me. The 5 of the 8 requirements need to be met. And it's something we can always improve upon. This is not in stone. Code is never in stone. Code is always changing and shifting, which is why this is so fun. But I feel very confident that this is a huge improvement over what we had before and is really serving the purpose of what we started out to do, to allow development to continue to take place.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with Kat and Brett. This is the 3rd time we've gone through this, and I think this is the best one you've done, Jared. I understood a lot more. I've looked through it. I mean, this is out of my wheelhouse. Always has been, always will be. We trust the professionals. But going through this, trying to make sense out of it, understanding part of it, and then having it presented a couple of times, even in meeting of the whole, it was kind of like, shoot. And I used the word shoot. But this one, you actually, it clicked, and I think you've done a great job. It's much better than what it was. The big developments are what spurred this. And I think we have come a long ways to understand what we can and can't do and lower the density. And I think that's what the citizens of Murray want. And I think that's what we've got here. And like I say, it's a work in progress, just like everything else. And we can continue to tweak it as we go ahead.
Diane?
Believe it or not, I agree with those guys. Oh my word. However, I would like to, I guess, have a better understanding of the tweaking process, because I think the sustainable building is really important, that we let developers know that those are our values. Though we can't require it, I get that. But I think that's important. So, and you've kind of talked me into the parking stuff. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm still concerned about it. But you know, but like I said, this is so important. It's so important that we get it right, and it is so much better than what we had before. And I know you've done a lot of work on it. And I think what we need to do tonight is take a vote. So that's my
So Diane, I'm just going to address your first comment about to get a better understanding of the tweaking process. So what I'm going to suggest from the administration's side of the city is that that we work with your office. We can ask Jennifer Kennedy to schedule a time where we can come back and identify the issues that you would like to talk about. We can include the developers' or comments tonight, other citizen comments tonight, and schedule a time in the committee of the whole when we can talk about those and work in time. So that would be the way that I would see the process moving forward, is that we just work that through the committee of the whole.
Okay.
Thank you, Doug.
It's good to know.
That is way
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else? Dale, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we continue to listen to the developers' needs as well. I think they have some good points, and they do this all the time. But I think you've done a great job. I just can't. And you should go home and get some sleep, and then ask for a raise.
Good luck with that.
Before I call for a motion, I just want to state there is a lot, and I do commend all the work that you guys have put into this. And really, I know there's, Corey had mentioned that, there's a career in this for a reason. And I totally get that. And I would be dismissed to say that we don't have a responsibility to our citizens too. And we do. And I think we just need to, say that a little bit more. A lot of times we don't. But it's so much better than what it was. And that's a start. But I definitely would love to see either better communication from staff and administration in regards to our concerns. And I think committee of the whole is great, but I would love to really have some more one-on-one, because I think we get more out of that a lot of times, and a better understanding. And there is so much that goes above my head that I still have so many questions too. And I know there will be tons of things that I can, if I had a real opportunity to have a one-on-one and have these conversations, I think I wouldn't be as resistant. And wherever that lies, it is what it is. But that's what would my one concern and request would be moving forward with this if it goes through. So, all right. Anyone else?
Oh, look at JL. I was going to say something. I saw him take that mic.
If you pass something tonight, would you please specify an effective date?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's 20, 30 days down the road before it's effective. So upon recording by the city recorder or something to that effect.
Effective date 2022. Just kidding. Yeah.
I just want to say thanks to Doug for that. That honestly, what you said, Doug, is what I absolutely had hoped for. So I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. All right. I will ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve an ordinance on the text amendment to the MCCD, TOD, MU, and new MU zones.
I'll second.
Do I have to say effective?
Oh, the date.
Yeah, effective upon recording. That's what I said. Effective immediately upon recording.
Put that in the notes.
I'll second.
All right. I have a motion and a second. Any abstentions, I guess? No? Kat? Any discussion on the motion?
Just waiting for the roll call.
Okay. Brooke?
Aye.
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 Aye. Let me follow up with that now. So it has passed, and thank you everyone for that. Jared and Melinda, I don't know if you're still on the agenda, but take a breather now. Go grab a Coke.
Thanks.
Thank
Melinda,
you so
Jared.
much. Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Corey.
If you filled out a form, please give them back to Jennifer. If not, she'll hunt you down. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. The next business item is consider a joint resolution of Taylorsville Benyon Improvement District of the Murray City Municipal Council declaring an intent to adjust their common service area boundary. Danny Estill will be presenting. Thank you. We'll give you a few minutes there, Danny.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's going to work. Okay. It worked earlier, but it's not working now.
Can you guys see? Blue screen.
It is in the packet. Okay, so basically what I was going to do is kind of give you a refresher of what we went through 60 days ago.
Yeah, we have it in our packet.
So just really, if you'll just turn to the map that describes the what we're doing here tonight.
This map, Danny?
That is the one.
Perfect.
Oh. And now I can't even get my computer up.
All right, Danny.
Okay.
I think we're almost there. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, my computer's actually turned back on, so that's good. All right. So this took place about 60 days ago, and so we're back. Taylorsville, Benyon, and Murray City are formalizing our common utility service boundary. So in the map, you'll notice that it's got all kinds of colors and lines and different things. The one thing that you need to understand is the white line currently is not changing, and that is Murray City's boundary. Okay? Nothing else changes as far as that part. Okay? Everything's still in Murray City. Okay, so what is changing is the service boundaries that are taking place, and so between us and Taylorsville Benyon. In the red area, you'll notice in the map, excuse me, in the red area, that is an area that Murray City is serving both water and sewer. And currently, they show that as part of their service area. So they're adjusting that as part of their boundary. So then in the green, Murray City currently serves that with sewer, but because of the elevation of that piece of property there in that development, Murray City was not able to serve that with water and meet the basic needs based on state requirements. And so they committed to serve it with water. So that's what's being adjusted, is they're moving their boundary so that it shows that they are serving that green area with water. and everything else is okay. Now, the couple of things that you need to be aware of here is that the city, we do not do any tax increment for water or sewer, but Taylorsville-Benyon does. As part of their financial structure, they do charge a tax increment for their water and their sewer services, which they provide both of those services. Well, and since they're only going to provide the water services, they've determined long ago that half of the increment is for their water and half of that increment is for their sewer. And so once a year, after the property taxes are paid, within the first quarter of the following year, the citizens that are on their water service, they're going to get a rebate, or they're going to get returned a portion of those taxes that would be typically for the sewer, because they don't provide the sewer, we do. Okay, so that's what we're doing tonight, is approving this agreement. Make sure I get the wording of this correctly for you. So it's a joint resolution of the Taylorsville-Benyon Improvement District and Murray City, declaring the intent to adjust our common service area boundary. So, any questions that you guys have? Love to answer
Anyone?
them.
Brett? You're good? Okay. I think this is so much easier.
Okay.
All right. I will take a motion.
Go ahead.
I move we approve the joint resolution of the Taylorsville-Benyon Improvement District and of the Murray City Municipal Council declaring, do we have to do that part yet? Declaring our intent to adjust the common service area boundary. The sentence got away from me.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? This is a public hearing.
Oh,
It's a
it says business item.
That it should be a
Sorry.
public hearing.
Yeah. I apologize. I had it as a business item. So before we go to the motion, I apologize, Jill.
It's all right. It's in the resolution. You would never see it if you didn't really look closely.
Okay. Well, anyone want to come up for a public comment? No one? Should I call somebody out? Just kidding. I'm kidding. All right. I will go ahead and close the public hearing now if nobody wants to come up. And we will go back to a motion.
From the top. All right.
Thank you.
Great. I move we adopt the joint resolution of the Taylorsville-Benyon Improvement District and of the Murray City Municipal Council declaring an intent to adjust their common service area boundary.
I'll second that.
All right. I have a motion and a second. Go ahead.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right. It has passed. We will go ahead and move to business item number 1 now officially. And considering a resolution approving the wastewater master plan. Danny, presenting again. Welcome back.
I'm going to turn this over to Ben Ford, our
It is a
wastewater
business
superintendent, to
Well-
talk to you.
Jill, is this a business item? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Business item.
Okay, so earlier this month, we presented the wastewater master plan at Committee of the Whole. And so tonight, we're just asking for you to consider a resolution approving that master plan. We have Ridley Griggs and Steve Jones from Hanson Allen Luce who helped us out with the plan. If you guys have any questions, we're more than happy to go over them.
Honestly, Danny, you beautifully described what was happening, and it made total sense and something we got to do.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
All right. Is that it? Are we? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you too for your time too from last time. I will go ahead and consider a motion for this.
I'll make a motion that we approve the wastewater master plan.
All right.
I'll second.
Okay. Got a motion and a second. Go ahead, Brooke.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, it has passed. Thank you so much. And I will turn the time over to Doug for an update at the mayor's office.
Thank you. First of all, let me excuse Mayor Camp, who had a family commitment tonight. Just briefly, the city has sent 4 of our firefighters to Oregon, along with one of our brush trucks, to assist in the firefighting efforts that are going on there in Oregon. We expect that they'll be gone for approximately 16 days, and we're not certain of which fire they'll be assigned to, but they could have multiple assignments while they're there. I want to mention that this Friday in the outdoor pool in Murray Park, there will be a movie in the park, the pool, at 9 o'clock. Soul Surfer is the name of the movie. And so anybody from the public who would like to attend that should register in advance at the Parks and Recreation office, because there is limitations in how many people we can take at the pool. And then finally, just a reminder that because of the Pioneer Day holiday on Saturday, the city offices will be closed on Friday. And that's all. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Anyone? All right. Thank you, Doug. Oh, wait. Go ahead, Kat.
Can I just say one thing on
Yeah.
the Pioneer Day coming up? Murray, we did so good. No fires for the 4th of July. We can do this. Keep it up. No fires for the 24th. Go team. Thank you.
And
I believe in us.
And with that, go Murray. Dale, go ahead. Do you have anything? No. Oh, I thought you were turning your mic on. I thought you were going to lead us in a cheer. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight and taking the time out of your afternoon. We appreciate it. And we are adjourned.